My son is 5, and for varying circumstances, we've ended up moving around a lot since he was born. At 2 of our homes, one when he was an infant and one when he was older and talking, there were some unexplained things happening that seemed to revolve primarily around him. The first place was shortly after my son was born. My husband at the time had gotten a brilliant job offering out of state in this sort of vacation spot, and part of the hiring deal was that his boss was going to put us up in this fully furnished resort community condo while we shopped around for a place of our own. It was kind of an unofficial senior community, but the place was gorgeous and surrounded by wildlife, and for a while I was thrilled. Our neighbor directly next door had come out one day to tell me that his wife used to have a lot of friends in the complex, but that now they were all dead. It was one of the only times I ever spoke with him, and a bit of an odd welcome, but oh well, I thought. Not too long after we moved in, I started being plagued by constant night terrors every single night. Sleep paralysis nightmares which I had never had before, that were brutally violent and gory, so bloody and intense that I was horrified they came out of my imagination, but I just chalked it up to being a new mum and getting irregular sleep. Then I started to get this feeling of dread the whole time I would be inside the condo. I started taking the baby out all day and playing outside at different parks until my husband would get off work at night. One night, I was finally having a wonderful dream where I was taking a slightly older version of my son around the mall that I used to go to as a kid. There was a pet store with a puppy in the window, and my son was pressed up against the glass smiling. And then, like a record scratch moment in the dream, he twisted his head up to me and spoke in a much older voice. "There's a man in the house. He was looking at me. Now he's looking at you." And I immediately woke up to hear my son crying over the monitor. I was so scared. I called my husband and made him stay on the phone with me until I could get us both dressed and out of the condo. Still, at this point, it was all just bad dreams and an icky watched feeling, so I didn't think anything of it, other than that I wished it would stop. I started keeping all the blinds closed and double-checking the locks all day, and was terrified to cross the living room back and forth in the dark for my son's night feedings. I would literally run. I felt like an idiot. One morning, my son woke me up on the monitor, so I walked into his room where his crib was, and I saw a splash of red on the wall. My husband was an overworked chef, and my very first thought was that he had been eating something with red sauce in there after work, and had made such a mess that it got on the wall. I was annoyed that I was going to have to get this stain off the wall, so we wouldn't get into trouble with his boss. Then, as I was getting my son out of his crib, I noticed another spot of red, then another, and another. I spun around in a daze, and there were red splashes and streaks and partial handprints on the walls, from the floor to the ceiling. I mean literally all over all 4 walls. I ran out of the apartment and called my husband. I couldn't breathe. I told him what had happened, and he knew I was already going crazy with the dreams, so he underreacted in my opinion. I came back, took a bunch of photos of the walls, and sent them to my friends, who had also been treating me like I was under too much stress and was maybe cracking up. They thought the spots were wild and told me I should come back to my hometown for a while. For the record, the stains did not look like blood, and they didn't look fresh at all, really. They looked like these rust-coloured, faded stains that used to be red, but had been cleaned or wiped away and hadn't come all the way out. I took my son back to stay with my parents while my husband got the walls redone, but he wasn't freaking out like I was, so I frankly just decided that I must have overreacted, and we came back to the condo. Now I'm thinking, why wasn't anyone worrying about the possibility of a break-in or anything like that? But when everyone is acting like you're being silly, you start to think it must be true. My husband started working more diligently on finding us a new place to live. We were back in the condo for only a couple more nights, but it was fairly uneventful, and I was actually feeling alright. Then, one morning I woke up before my son, so I was just fiddling around in different apps on my phone and relaxing in bed until he woke up to eat. I opened the phone gallery to look at some of the 10 million pictures and videos I had taken of the baby, and my heart dropped. All of the photos were just black. I thought, oh my god, all his baby pictures and videos got corrupted and ruined. I scrolled down, and every thumbnail was just black. But then, I eventually got to the last pictures I had taken the day before, and realized they were all still there. The black thumbnails were all brand new. I started opening them one at a time, and there were 80 to 100 photos and videos. I checked the details, and they were all from last night when I was asleep. The videos were all different lengths, from 20 seconds to 2.5 minutes, and you could hear some scuffling and very soft murmuring, but nothing distinct, except for one point in one video where I thought I could hear a man's voice say, "And you too." All the pictures and videos were pitch black, like the lens was covered maybe. I packed up all of our things and took my son back to my parents until my husband signed a lease on a new place a few days later. And absolutely nothing ever happened again in the new place. And I never felt scared in the night, and I never felt uneasy in the home. We were just happy and going about our days. I really almost forgot about it until a friend jokingly asked me if we were still being haunted. And I was like, oh wow, no, I hadn't even thought about that in so long. A few years later, we lived in another place where some weird things happened, but I never felt terror like I did at this condo.
I work in a fairly large building. The front part is a storefront and the back is a warehouse, so in order to all keep in communication with each other during our shift, we use walkie-talkies. Sometimes we do get interference from passing truckers or other businesses in our walkie channel, but we can always tell because the person speaking sounds crackly and distorted. But this doesn't happen too often, and it's super obvious when someone who isn't in the building is the one coming through. Last night though, I was sitting in my inventory office all alone. It was a slow evening, so only one staff member was on the sales floor, and he was helping a customer. I could hear them lightly talking through my window that faces the showroom. My other two co-workers were in the back of the building in their offices, and since it was a slow evening, we weren't needing to communicate via walkie for a while. Out of nowhere, I hear a blood-curdling scream coming from the hallway connected to my office. It was so loud that I thought one of my co-workers was being attacked in the hall. I jumped up from my desk and ran to open my door, fully expecting to see a gruesome crime taking place. To my surprise, when I opened the door, the hallway was completely dark and empty. Strangely enough though, all the machinery, was on and running, which never happens unless someone physically turns them on when they need to use them. I was so confused, because all of our lights in the building are motion sensitive, so unless someone is in the room, they stay off, and someone would need to physically be in the room to turn on the electrics. Our doors are also locked 24/7, and you can always hear an electronic beep when someone is using their keycard to get into the hallway. I heard no noise whatsoever before I heard the woman screaming bloody murder. Then it hit me. I'd forgotten my walkie-talkie on the desk in the hallway. As I stared at the walkie glowing in the dark room, a chill ran up my spine. I suddenly remembered the story I was told when I was new to the company. I always thought my co-worker was just messing with me, since I was the new girl, so I didn't take this story to heart. But she went on to tell me about a woman who haunts the building, and that there is a spirit of a little boy there too. The woman is the most active though, and is known to speak clearly over the walkie, sometimes screaming and asking for help. Literally the second after I nervously ran into the dark hallway to grab my walkie, my co-worker radioed in and asked if anyone else heard the woman screaming. We all jumped on the line and said we heard it too. One co-worker even noted how you can tell it came from our line of devices directly because the woman's screaming was clear as day and not distorted. We checked all the walkies, and none were missing from the charging station, other than the ones that we all kept on us, meaning the woman screaming had to come from one of ours, or from spiritual interference, if that's a thing. I will never forget the sound of her screaming. It was the sound of pure terror and distress. It made my fight or flight instincts kick in, and her screaming literally lasted around 20 seconds. I feel really bad for her, being stuck there, forced to relive whatever trauma she experienced in her lifetime. It sounds terrible.
I still find it hard to stomach watching the film Rosemary's Baby, or listening to the lullaby song from the opening title sequence. A few years ago, I started watching this movie late at night. I was a night owl, so often I would binge Netflix shows or films in the late hours of the night. This wasn't my first time watching Rosemary's Baby, but it was only my second time watching it though. About halfway into this lullaby that's in the title sequence, I heard 3 loud knocks on my bedroom window. I paused, waited a minute or two, and then unpaused the film. 3 loud knocks again. I assumed at that point that something was terribly wrong, so I left my room altogether and made my way to a different part of the house. I was in a different room that had a window, and suddenly that window got 3 knocks on it as well. I ran into another part of the house, the kitchen, which had a massive window in there, with sensor lights on the outside of it that often light up if an animal or person walks by. And my kitchen window started knocking. 3 knocks. No sensor light came on. I grabbed a flashlight and started peering outside of all my windows with the flashlight, but didn't see anything or anyone. No person or animal. And it wasn't the sound of creaking. It truly sounded like a person's hand knocking against my window. I remember that night that even going to the bathroom was a nightmare, because there's a window in my bathroom, and it would start knocking there as well. I have a wooden front door that has a large glass oval panel in it. So basically, I can see into the outside because my front door is half wood and half glass. I have sensor lights outside of my front door as well. I remember looking out into the night with my face up against the glass panel, hoping to see something. And whatever was knocking right back at me as I stood there watching for something or someone to appear. You would think that this was an isolated incident, except it wasn't. This nightmare continued for the next 2 weeks, and it always started during the night. At some points, I asked my father to come late at night and do an entire sweep of the house from outside with a flashlight, and he never found anything. I asked several times and nothing or no one was ever found. After a few weeks of dealing with this every single night, it randomly decided to stop and went away. Whatever it was, it all started while I was watching the opening credits of Rosemary's Baby, and that's why I haven't watched the film since that incident. Nothing like this has happened ever since. Part of me wonders why it went on for several weeks. The other thing to note is that I often got terrified and invited people over late at night since it was a continuous thing for several weeks. If someone else was in the room, then whoever or whatever was doing this wouldn't be knocking anymore. I remember that when I invited my dad over, he sat with me but didn't hear anything. I made him sit for half an hour with me, but the knocking had stopped during that point. I asked him to go outside and double-check to make sure that no one or nothing was there, and after he left the room and went outside, the knocking started up again. It seemed to be a thing that was only meant for me. If I asked someone else to come over because I was feeling scared, it would go quiet for a bit, until that person left the room I was in and went out of hearing range. Part of me worried that I was going mad and hallucinating all of this, so I started using my phone to try and record some of these things, and I managed to get several recordings of the knocking. After a few weeks, it went away. It was ridiculously difficult to sleep though. While all you could hear on your bedroom window is incessant knocking that ended up taking several weeks to just mysteriously go away. And as I said, it followed me all over the house. So if I would be reading a book in my study, for example, that window would start knocking. My bathroom has a window, as I said, so brushing my teeth or going for a pee late at night was also a thing that felt unsettling to do. After a while, I did become somewhat jaded towards the whole thing, and just accepted that some freaky stuff was going on. I became less afraid of it, and more annoyed that it was bothering me. Eventually, whatever it was, simply just moved on. I got reminded of this incident today because one of my friends had mentioned watching Rosemary's Baby for the first time, and it really took me back to those few weeks. I don't know if the film was in any way, shape or form related to the incident that soon followed. However, given its content and nature, I wouldn't rule it out.
My parents bought this house in 1991 and sold it in 2013. I have 3 siblings. I'm the oldest, then it's Lily, Max, and Ernesto. When we moved in, the house was a mess. My parents had to paint and do a bunch of repairs. The inside of the closet door had a reddish-brown stain that no matter how many times we painted over it, you could still see it. I think my dad said that a neighbour told him someone was murdered in the house, but I can't find anything on Google. I'm not sure how to even look it up. The hallway was the scariest area of the house for me. It always felt cold there, even when it was 90 degrees outside. We are Mexican Catholics, and in the hallway, my mum had a little altar with candles, statues of La Virgen de Guadalupe and Sacred Heart, and porcelain angels. Sometimes when we'd wake up in the morning, the statues and angels would be turned facing the wall. Someone told us that that was a sign that it may be a poltergeist. I remember when I was in high school, while I was getting ready for school every morning, I would walk away from the dresser and whatever I was using would be gone. I would leave and come back and it would be right where I had left it. Sometimes I would even like to test it by purposely leaving my glasses or whatever, and it would happen. It got to the point where I was more annoyed than scared, and I would yell, "Put my stuff back, now!" At night, you could hear footsteps in the hallway when everyone was asleep. One night it was just my mum and I in the house. She was in the living room watching her novellas, and I was in the dining room doing arts and crafts at the dinner table. I felt someone shove me from behind. I turned and no one was there, so I ran to the living room where my mum was. I always felt like someone was watching me, and like always a shadow. My mum said that a shadow followed her into the bathroom, and she said that she felt the shadow went through her. Lily, my sister, and I shared a room, and one night I went out. She said I had just left, and she felt something, or someone, climb on top of her and start choking her while whispering in her ear that she was going to die. Ernesto told me that he saw the shadow once, and the bathroom door closed on its own. That's all he experienced. My brother Max would say that when he fell asleep on the living room couch at night, he would hear something growling in his ear. We wouldn't tell people about this, but sometimes we would have visitors, like family from Mexico, and in the morning they'd ask us, "There's a ghost here, isn't there?" We would mostly laugh it off so they wouldn't get scared, or ask them, "Oh, why do you say that?" They would tell us similar experiences to ours.
I wanted to share the story of what happened to me on a trip to my grandparents around Christmas time in what I believe was 2015. This is something that's never happened since then, and never really happened to that extent before then. I never spent the night at my grandparents' house very often growing up. They had a really neat ranch, and I always hated the feeling of being in the dark there, but that was it mostly. After my parents moved far away from them, things changed, and I spent a day or two before and a day or two after Christmas at their house. My grandmother collected lots and lots of antiques after she got married, and her house was full of them, so it was a cool place. Things became different when we made this shift to staying at my grandparents' house for a few days every year. There was this feeling of rules that I got from the house, or maybe I learned them. I had to be in the bedroom that I always stayed in by 11 p.m, otherwise a feeling would well up around me. It started low and slow, but would ratchet up with intensity. The feeling would hit me even if I went to the bathroom and back to the bedroom. It was like an incredible and dreadful feeling of being watched all over, combined with a silent screaming that I couldn't hear that would slowly get louder. At 2 a.m, and any time after that, the feeling or entity was gone, and I could peacefully use the bathroom, etc. So one trip, I decided to ignore it. I told my parents about the weirdness and what I had felt, and they told me it was all in my imagination. I was a young man who'd graduated college, so I felt really mature and that I knew it all. Everyone else went to bed, and I remember sitting on a lazy boy chair watching Full Metal Jacket on the TV. It was 11 p.m, so I was a little wary, but I just turned on all the lights. I had a really hard time focusing on the movie. I started to feel like I was being watched. I'd look towards the areas where my brain was suggesting the attention was coming from, but there was nothing there. It continued to get worse and worse, like a heavy weight was bearing down on me and freaking me out to the point that I grabbed the remote to turn the TV off, when suddenly the feeling stopped. I was totally comfortable and thought that I had faced my fear. About 20 minutes later, a painting on the wall suddenly shifted. I was very startled as the painting was very large and it made a thud sound. A second later, the couch near to it shifted away from the wall about an inch. The couch was this huge antique thing. It couldn't have moved by itself. Suddenly, the intensity of eyes on me and the silent screaming was turned up to 11, and I remember turning off the TV and lights and running to my bedroom. However, it somewhat felt even worse in the bedroom, like I was being pulled by a weak force to the closet. I felt sick, and I remember crying. I fought the urge and was pulling and retreated to the bathroom. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the floor by the shower, opposite the door, and watched the door trembling. I thought about crying for help, but my parents had made me feel so bad about the things I told them before that I knew I couldn't tell them anything. Everything again calmed down for a minute, and I got to my knees. I watched a pencil roll off the bathroom counter and under the door. I watched it roll down the hall and under the floor in my bedroom. I closed the bathroom door and waited. I remembered I had my phone, so I looked at the time, and it was 1:30 a.m. I waited on the floor, and when 2 a.m. came around, I felt the grip fully go and felt safe again. I opened the door to my bedroom, and for some reason felt totally safe and able to sleep in my bed. I climbed into bed and slept, exhausted but feeling totally safe. The next morning, I woke up and went into the living room. My parents and grandparents asked me about the couch and the painting, and after explaining that I had no idea, I helped them put everything back right. After breakfast, I opened my closet door. I saw a few very startling things in it. I saw a shotgun with bullets, and access up into the dark attic with the hatch fully open. I have never been or slept in that room since.
Years ago, my mother and her sister were in a hospital room with my dying grandfather. The room was closed, but they were still awake, waiting for the nurse to bring my grandfather some medication. Eventually, they hear the nurse outside the door. Bear in mind this was years ago, so the hospital was a bit antiquated. The doorknobs were old, so you might guess that they required some force to open the door. The door suddenly opens to a nurse, pale as a ghost, who was carrying a tray with both hands. She immediately asks, "Who let me in?" My mother and aunt both look at each other, and then back at the nurse. "It certainly wasn't us," says my aunt. "I can't believe this. Nobody in this hospital is ever going to believe what just happened," exclaimed the nurse. Both my mum and aunt look back at my father, and my aunt says, "Well, there's definitely someone else watching over our father." My grandfather passed away a couple of days later. This one happened to me and my brother. We were over at my mum's house in our hometown during vacations a couple of years ago. Anyway, my father's phone had this extremely cheap Bejeweled knockoff that happened to have extremely loud sounds during gameplay. You'd know he was playing it even if you were on the other side of the house, and he never bothered lowering the volume or muting the phone. So one day, my brother and I are in my mum's old room. I was playing on my PSP and my brother on his Game Boy. Suddenly, we started hearing these sounds this game makes. However, they weren't consistent, like they'd come back every couple of minutes. But here's the catch. There was no one in the house. The sounds were loud enough that it made us think my father was in the living room below us. My brother decides to venture out, and when he comes back, he tells me no one's home. Eventually the sounds stopped. We never heard them again. Another experience happened to my mother in her home, a couple of days after her brother passed away. His passing created a very conflictive situation in her home, since the heritage was being fought over. My mum and her other brother were at the middle of this conflict. So one day, One of the things that had to be done was to open the safe in the house, since it contained papers and other important things for my mum and her siblings. They tried everything they could to open the safe, but it wouldn't open. Everyone except my mother gave the combination a try, but it just didn't work. Eventually, everyone gives up, and they leave the room with the safe, except my mum. My mum says she sat facing the safe and stared at it a whole minute before whispering, "Mum, Dad, listen, I know you may not like what's going on, but we really need this safe open, so if you could lend me a hand with it, I'll be forever grateful." She attempted to open the safe one last time, and it opened. No one else was able to open the damn safe, even by following some instructions they found in my late uncle's room.
I'm 90% sure the church I work at is haunted. I work in the church nursery, which was the original church built in the early 50s. They now have a detached main building for the adults, and my building is the youth and nursery building. The church also owns a house right next door that was built in the late 60s, or maybe 70s, which the youth leader gets to live in. I've been working in the nursery alone for almost 4 years now. I also babysit the kids of the youth pastor in their house next door. At the nursery, we have mainly very old toys made in the 70s that still somehow manage to work. I've never replaced the batteries in these toys. After Sunday school, everyone in my building except me and my kids move over to the service building, so the kids and I are completely alone. I only ever have 2 kids at a time since we're a very small church. Without fail, at 11 AM every Sunday, when youth leaves the building, I will have the 3 same toys from the 70s randomly start making noises. Which I know that my kids aren't the ones making them go off, since at 11, we have a snack, so we are all at the table. At first, I thought I was crazy since it only ever happened while I was alone with the kids until last year. Last year, we got a new pastor, and his wife decided she was going to work in the nursery with me since the youth pastor had a newborn, and we wanted extra help in case we had a situation requiring 2 people. Well, they started going off in her presence too. She doesn't seem to think anything of it, and once the pandemic started, she no longer works with me, and I'm alone watching one toddler. Now when it's just us, I will hear talking, footsteps, and doors opening and closing. I don't normally feel anything bad from the thing in the church, so I leave it be. Now let's talk about the house next door that the church owns. This is the house I'm slightly scared of. Things are always falling and breaking in the house. The first thing that comes to mind is 2 years ago. The kids and I were in the living room playing, and all of a sudden, we hear glass breaking. I searched the house, and all the light bulbs in the bathroom were shattered. I was freaked out to say the least, but apparently, stuff like that just happens over there. Another time, a shelf in the parents' bedroom went flying off of the wall during nap time. The nails were still in the wall, and the shelf still had its teeth bracket thing on it, so there was no way it could have just fallen off the wall. It also landed 2 or 3 feet away from where it was hung up at. Again, the parents weren't concerned because apparently that's not the first time that's happened. Another time, I was changing the baby's diaper in the room, and he had a sliding door on his closet. He was fussy, so I was singing to him, and all of a sudden, I was hit from behind. His closet door somehow fell on me. I put his door back up into the brackets, and maybe an hour later, we went back to his room to get his shoes so we could play outside, and as we were walking past the closet door, leaving, the door falls almost on the baby. But thankfully, I was fast enough that it landed against my arm, bruising me pretty good. I told his parents and got a very nonchalant, weird. Then we come to last night. I was giving the baby a bath, and my son was in the bath with him, and everyone else was next door at the church. I'm sitting on the stool in front of the bath waiting for them to be done playing in the bathtub. All of a sudden, a canvas picture frame falls off of the wall in the hallway closest to the bathroom. I'm kind of freaked out. I fix the picture and get the kids out of the bath. At first, I bring the baby to his room to get him ready, and he's shaking and crying and looking into the corner of his room by his closet, looking scared. I have never seen this baby scared. He's a very happy baby all the time, so we immediately left his room, left the light on and closed the door, and went into the living room with my son. I told his parents again, and they just said, yeah, that happens sometimes. I'm getting a little bit scared to go to work. I work either at the church or at their house, at least 4 days a week, sometimes more. I'm starting to not feel safe.